Hey guys, it's Sam, and in this video I'm going to give you guys some tips, tricks, advice for using water-based markers. Specifically, I will be using, if I can pick it up, Crayola markers, but if you have a different brand of water-based markers, the same tips apply, no problem. All the while you'll be seeing the process of this artwork, which, yes, was done with Crayola markers. So let's get into it. All right, so this was done on a live stream. Obviously, feel free to ignore the zoomies of my face. But so yeah, this will be advice in general for water-based markers, not just specific to Crayola. There's a lot of brands out there that you can pick from, and they're all water-based. Or if you pick a water-based marker, then it's going to be water-based. So it'll work quite similarly with Crayola markers. So stuff like Tombow, I think Arteza has their own brands. Then you also have those other kind of like watercolor markers that are like kind of like the watercolor ink almost, but it's like an ink pen, but it's watercolor. But those are all going to perform basically the same. They're all water-based, so they're all activated with water. They all like blend with water. So I'm going to be using Crayola markers here. This was a commission for my parents of their dog Murphy. So that's what I'm going to be working on and kind of discussing a little bit, along with just general art tips for any sort of water-based markers. If you use water-based markers, hello, hi, how are you? If you don't use water-based markers, you should try it out, give it a try. But this is going to be more focused on water-based marker tips. So first of all, it's water-based. So use water. I know there's probably some purists out there who are like, oh no, that's cheating. You can't use water with water-based markers. Get out of here. Basically, I am of the belief that there is no cheating in art. So just make art fun for you. If you don't want to use water with your water-based markers, don't use water with them. You don't usually really kind of need to. I find that they don't blend half bad just with the markers themselves. And yes, that does include Crayola as a plane is flying by as I'm saying this. You can check out my video on the Crayola Colors of the World review, where I did a portrait without any water. I just mixed with the colors themselves. So definitely possible. I've done flowers and stuff without using any water, and it's just fine. So you don't need water if you don't use water. But if you want to have a little bit of an easier time, if you want to kind of push things further, you kind of want to explore a little bit, use water. I prefer to use water brushes, but that's not a requirement. I just find that it's a lot easier to use water brushes. The water's already built into your brush. You're going to want to be careful about your paper though, because I found that those brushes can kind of perform differently depending on the paper that you use. I do have a big, huge, giant comparison video of Strathmore and Canson cheap papers for watercolor artists, but obviously as water-based marker artists, this also applies to us. Because normally I use Canson XL mixed media paper. This is what I'm using in this video is Canson XL watercolor paper, but it's the same thing. So I will link that in the description if you'd like to check out, or in the iCard, if you'd like to check out some papers that are cheap that you're going to be able to have a not awful time with when using your water-based markers. But yeah, so water, and definitely just swatch it out. Take a scrap piece of paper scrap of what your paper that you're going to be using is what I would ideally recommend. So if you're going to be using the XL Canson watercolor paper, just take a page and just scribble. Just start like laying down your colors. What do the colors look like when I swatch them out? Because they're going to look a little bit different depending on what paper you're using. So if you're using arches, for example, you're going to have a bit of a different experience with the marker going down, especially if it's cold press versus hot press watercolor paper. You're going to have a bit of a different experience. And then also test out what happens when you add water. What happens if I do this? What happens if I do that? I would recommend that in general for any art thing ever. No matter what tool you're using, swatch it, test it out, experiment. Like that's general advice that applies to anything. And that includes digital artists. I see you. Watching this video anyway, I see you. But yeah, just test it out, see what happens when you do this, see what happens when you do that, what happens when you mix different colors. And I have found, I know it's scary, but I have found that especially when you're using lighter colors, this is really noticeable, but stuff like yellow, if I put yellow on top of a darker color and it picks up that color, alcohol markers have the same thing happen. It's gonna stain the tip of the marker. Not a big deal. I've never had an issue with this. I've used these markers long term. Same with Copic markers, I've used them long term. I've done this sort of technique. Just scribble it on another piece of paper, on a scrap piece of paper. It doesn't really matter what the paper is, as long as it's, if you're using more expensive markers, you probably want a nicer, softer paper. Like I found computer paper works just fine, but just scribble on that to get the rest of that excess ink out of it. And the tip of the marker might be stained, but it's not damaged. I have found no issues. I've been able to completely use those markers and those colors, and they still come out just fine. No problem whatsoever. I've never heard of anybody having an issue with that, but I know that it's very scary and intimidating, especially the first time it happens. You're like, oh no, I ruined my marker, but you didn't. Your marker is just fine. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. You're good. You can keep going. So those are my sort of general sort of starter tips. I do have a more laid out, detailed, super beginner tutorial talking about how to start like from scratch, zero, for water-based markers. That's on my Patreon page, patreon.com/sambeawesome. If you want a more detailed kind of walkthrough, like step-by-step real-time sort of thing. Those are all the scribbles that you could see on the spare sheet of paper while I was working on this commission. That's all from that tutorial. But back to this, I'm just going to talk about sort of stuff that I did in this particular artwork. So for this artwork, it was a commission, and it was for a pet portrait. I wanted to make sure that the drawing is accurate to the pet. I wanted to best represent the dog because I knew that, it's someone's paying for it. It's going to somebody, they want it to look like their dog, which is why I did trace it at the beginning. And from there, I kind of just started where I would feel most comfortable. And I feel like that's pretty important, especially when you're trying stuff that's perhaps new. I'm still kind of new with Crayola markers. This was done a while ago. I don't actually remember when I did this, but this was done quite a while ago. But at the time, and still even now, fur is very difficult. So I was a little intimidated to start with the fur. So I started, where did I start? I think it was the nose. But just start with somewhere that you feel more confident, more comfortable. If you want to experiment, I think, because you saw me pull up several times that scrap piece of paper where I would test out color mixing, where I would test out what happens if I did this or that. Definitely have a scrap piece of paper, I would say, while you're working on whatever piece you're working on. And you don't have to do like a pet or a dog or something. You can do whatever you're working on. It's a landscape, it's a portrait of a person, what have you. I recommend having that scrap piece of paper there just to kind of help you out. And also I used it to cover my hand to not have my skin oils get into the artwork as well. Definitely an important thing, especially for doing a commission. But from there, it's a mixture of laying down the marker directly. And also, I think I use plastic a little bit, but not too much. But then I also there's a couple different techniques here that I use. So let's go through it one by one. So using the marker directly, I know this can be pretty scary and intimidating, especially when you've never sort of done this thing before. But I assure you, I feel like it looks so much better when you go in with the direct marker, just because you're getting the full extent of the ink, you're getting the full punch of those colors, you're getting that full vibrancy, all of that stuff directly onto your paper. And you can always lighten it up with using water and any tissues and stuff if you want to pick up some of that color. Some of that color. You can also go more in depth. You can go darker as well with using that straight marker. So that's definitely one method you can use. Another method is using plastic or just something where you can pick back up the marker. So Yupo Paper is another option. I've definitely used Yupo Paper with my Crayola markers before in the past. So something like, well, it's also like plastic paper. So plastic basically is what I'm getting at. But it doesn't have to be like, oh, I need a plastic palette or I need something fancy. I just have, I had some shipment or something come in, it was wrapped in plastic, and I just kept the plastic that it was mailed in. And then I've been using that as my plastic palette. So don't think you need anything fancy. Just have, or a Ziploc bag or something like that. Not sponsored. I forget that that's a brand, but just some sort of plastic I think works really great for having a palette and just picking up a little bit of color at a time. And then also picking up color directly from the marker. So this works best with brushes. So I use water brushes. I feel like super, super easier to use water brushes compared to normal brushes in terms of these water-based markers. I feel like it would be such a pain to use regular brushes. I like them for watercolor, but I feel like they would be a pain for water brushes. But do what works for you. If you find that regular brushes work better for you for water-based markers, go for it. Do that. If you find that water brush, there's too many water words. Find water brushes work better, then go for that. I'm using Ohuhu. I found I like them better than the Aquash brand. But now mine are starting to fall apart because I've been brutalizing them. So RIP in pieces. I'm probably gonna have to get some new ones soon. Yeah, so you can also pick up ink that way. You can pick it up directly from the plastic or you can pick it up directly from the marker. And from the plastic, I just mean scribble the marker onto the plastic and then you can pick it up with a brush or pick it up directly from the marker and go that way. So you'll see me doing that throughout this piece. That's like right now I'm picking up directly from the marker, and it kind of gives you just a little bit less ink. It's a little bit lighter, more diluted with water sort of thing. So that's definitely a route you can go. And this, I mean, if you've used watercolor in the past, this is going to be like a much more approachable medium than I would say for somebody who's never done anything watercolor, water-based markers sort of thing. If you've used alcohol markers, I think that this might be approachable too, but it is quite a different feel. But I think you're going to find that it's much more forgiving than alcohol-based markers, because alcohol-based markers, I have found from my experience, if you screw up, you kind of screwed up. You kind of either got to work, you got to like live with it, be like, okay, that's there, or you can try and fix it, but or change it, but like, you know, there's kind of no going back once the mistake happens. But for water and watercolor, water-based markers kind of thing, it's a little bit more forgiving. You can kind of push things around, manipulate things more. You get lift. You don't get lift with alcohol-based markers. So that's the thing. But yeah, I don't know how helpful this video was. I know I was talking super fast, so I was trying to get as much information as I could out in like a short YouTube video. But if you'd like more detailed not instructions, but like tips, tutorials, demonstrations, I even have a full-on draw along with me where I take you step by step for like 3 hours from start to finish of drawing a rose with Crayola markers, but you can obviously use whatever you have in mind. But that's all on my Patreon page, patreon.com/sambeawesome. So if you liked more water-based marker and other mediums, because I cover a lot of mediums, you can check that out and linked in the description. I super appreciate all of the support. It means a lot to me, and I'm really glad that you guys like my stuff and are able to support me. I really appreciate that. But that's kind of it for this video. I hope y'all found it helpful. If there's any other videos you'd like to see from me, let me know in the comments down below. If you'd like to see my full list of tutorials / art resources you can use for your artworks, like stock photos and stuff like that, I'll put a link to that giant Google document as well in the description down below. Definitely check it out. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Hope you guys found this video helpful. If you try out water-based markers, let me know how that adventure has been going for you in the comments down below. And yeah, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have an awesome rest of your day, and I will see y'all next time. Bye-bye.